Hello and welcome to Tom Talk Shop. Today I'm going to go over sharpening curve scrapers. I have my homemade or home carved one and a round or a French curve, whatever it is here. And I'm going to go over the techniques of sharpening these as opposed to sharpening this guy. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and if you have any ideas for videos or have any questions, please leave them in the comments. We do our best to answer them as we can. Thank you. Let's make some sawdust. Okay, the first thing I want to kind of do is go over the tools that I use to do this. I mean, you can use what you want, but these are my basic set of tools. I've got a half round file here. I think this is an 8 or a 10 inch. So it's flat on this side and it's round on this, and it's a metal file, pretty coarse. I have a half-inch dowel wrapped in 100 grit wet dry, a half-inch dowel, yeah, it's half-inch, wrapped in 400 grit wet dry, a coarse stone, my burnishing tool. Sukey will put a card up there to how we made this. If you don't have one, you can make it for $1. Any piece of wood, that's a quality piece of wood, some oil, and these will be the 2 scrapers that we'll be sharpening. So let's get started on the process. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the round side of my half round file, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to be working back and forth kind of right here like it. And I'm just going to kind of smooth this out. And while I'm doing this, I want to get rid of all my burrs and everything off of this. It'll be really rough when I'm done with the file, but then we'll come up behind it and we'll clean it up. So let's get started on that process. Okay, now I'm going to just take my file. The file cuts going that way, and it kind of just find the right angle for it to cut. And you just kind of, sometimes you've got to do this with it, but just kind of rock it back and forth. And you'll feel little high and low spots, and we're trying to work some of those out. Of course, building up a huge burr, but we're going to get rid of that. And right there, I'm going to just do a little bit of that. Okay, that's starting to shape up, and then just keep angling your file till you get a good cut. Now I'm going to true that up just a little bit. Okay, now I've got that done, but it's really rough, and I'll show it for the camera. You can see now, you can see all the file marks. If I can get the light to shine on there, right, there we go. You can see all those really rough file marks right there, and it's like that all the way around. And there's a really rough burr on both sides. So the first thing we're going to do next is I'm going to take my flat stone, put some oil on it. This is a couple 100 grit. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's synthetic and it's pretty rough. Just work both sides till the burr is roughly worked off. There we go, that side's good. Not quite. Okay, now I'm going to clamp it back on the block. And I'm going to take my poor man's slip here and just start working the rough out of this. This is my 100 grit one. Just go back and forth, move it every so often so that you're not wearing all that abrasive off of it. Now it's bringing a burr back on. You just want to keep knocking your burr off as you go. This being 100 grit, it cuts it really fast. You want to trust your fingertips, but you want to get rid of as much of that naughty little burr as you can. And do it at this stage before you get to the finer grits, because they'll take you forever once you get there. That's, well, I still got a little spot there. Now we're pretty good. Now I'll just rinse and repeat with my 400 grit. Same thing. And what I'm trying to do here is just get as many of my scratches out as I can. The closer to a mirror polish you can get this guy, the easier it's going to be to put your burr in it and have a nice consistent burr. You don't have to do this every time you sharpen it, just every time you really want to retrue your blade. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to have to take a little bit more burr off. Now I want to try to show this to the camera. There we go. Can you see that right there? Okay, you can see this is pretty smooth now. It's not a mirror finish, but it doesn't have the big coarse scratches that you had before. It's much smoother than it was. And for our purposes, that's smooth enough. I've got it out of the block. I'm just going to go back over with my 400 grit. Anything will work. You can do this with an Arkansas stone. Too lazy to walk over to the other bench and grab it. And again, trust your fingertips. Just want to get that extra edge off of there, that burr. Sorry, not an edge, a burr. Plus, everything around here rusts, so this is a good time for me to grind the rust off. Take a piece of paper towel and check your work. If it's catching your paper towel too, you want to work it some more. Okay, that's nice and smooth. All right, now I'm going to put it back on the block. This is really more to protect your vise. Just make sure that you're clearing the block by just a wee bit. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the round side of my burnishing tool. This was an old chisel, and you can see our video on how we made this. And I'm going to take it and pressing quite hard, I'm going to just start rolling back and forth all the way. You can do it half and half, it doesn't matter. Just keep going back and forth like this. I'm not going to film doing the whole thing. It takes typically 100 to 150 passes. And if it takes more than that, don't worry about it. Just keep doing it till it's nice and smooth, and you will feel a burr start work up. That's the beginning of the burr you need. My other bit of advice is keep your hands out of the way, because a scraper always seems to cut better than it scrapes, especially flesh. You just keep that edge on there and keep going back and forth. And when we're done, we'll come back and we'll talk about the next part of this. Okay, I'm just about done. So now the first thing I showed you doing it slow, but now I'm doing it quite fast. I've been doing this for probably 10 minutes on this one. Sometimes they take a lot more swipes. And I can feel I've got just ever the slightest little bit of a raise. It's not really even a burr yet. Just a tiny bit. Sukey will put a drawing up there to really show you what it looks like, but you have to trust your fingers. And what's important is just try to get it as even as you can all the way around. And it's very fine. It's not a huge burr, and it's not the final burr yet. Okay, let's move to the next step. Okay, I've got it to where I'm happy with it. I'm going to take it out of the vise. And I can feel just ever the slightest little bit of a edge on it. Now what I want to do is I want to take the flat side of my burnishing tool and basically rinse and repeat without sticking my fingers here. And what I'm doing now, and Sukey will show you the next phase of the drawing, is I'm taking this burr, and I'm going to keep doing this until the burr is basically flattened out, going the other direction. And this goes a lot faster. Yeah. That one's done, and then we just flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. This poor old scraper's seen better days. Whew. Sometimes you just got to get them where you can get a bite on it. And don't be afraid to press down good and hard. Please don't rip your fingers. Okay, now I'll just take a little oil on a rag and wipe that off so I can see what I'm doing. And you can see here where it's kind of changed the appearance of the metal too. What we're doing at this point with the burnisher is we're actually hardening this edge here. So I've created a mushroom edge to start with, and then I flattened the edge back up. Now I'm going to put it back in the vise, and I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Normally, I only sharpen one side of a scraper, but with my round scrapers, I usually do both sides because you have to use them bidirectional, and they're so asymmetric. Now what I do is I just take it, and I have no idea what that angle is. It's about 5 or 7 degrees, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And I just go over it until I feel a burr raising up. It doesn't need to be too much. If you have too much of a burr, it'll actually not cut as good. You just, a certain amount of experience. It's hard to teach that without actually having the person feel it, but we'll do our best I can with the cameras. Same thing on this side. Just working it. Again, you're pressing hard. Take great pains not to skew yourself. And getting the just perfect angle is not that important, really. Just get it close. The main point is you're just putting a lot of pressure down on that one little edge. Okay, I've got a pretty good burr. I think it'll cut now. Let me find my test cut. I got a piece of something around here we can put in the vise. And let's see if we can get it to raise a burr. Yeah, there we go. We're getting a good shaving up. Let's try the other side. Well, that side's even better, even though it didn't get it quite as sharp. It's actually giving you a better shaving there. Getting that? Okay, let's move on to the French scraper. Okay, same drill as before on the other one. I'm just going to have to take, and this one I use the flat side to do this part of it. And I'm just going to kind of, it's got some dings and dents in it that have accumulated over the last year or two. And I'm going to just kind of, slide the file along. And where necessary, like right there, take a bigger bite. And I'll turn the file over to get this inside. Now in here, I'm going to have to just use the corner of the file and kind of creatively get what I can get best I can. That actually looks pretty good. And then I'll just go. And for that part, I think I'm going to do it. Well, let's see, maybe I can get it like this. Yeah, I can pull it. Ouch. Yeah, I'm getting it that way. I want to soften that corner just a tiny bit. Okay, now I'll pop it out of there. And I want to just take my, in this case, I'm just going to take my 100 grit. I want to to get my burr off of both sides to start with. You can also see I made myself a little bit of a line. It won't stay on there very long, but it kind of lets me know what I've done and what I haven't done, because it would be hard to sharpen all this in one pass. It takes me about 3 passes to sharpen this thing. And just trust your fingertips, because your eyes won't see it. And while I'm at it, I'm going to get some leopard spots off of there. All right, that's close enough for my purposes. Now, I'm going to just probably hold it freehand for this one and just do the same thing, taking my poor man's slip, getting in to all the tight spaces and just cleaning it up. Now, just take your burrs off again, because it raised a little bit of one there. And then take your finer slip, oil it up, or use water, whatever your preference is, and go around inside this until you can get it pretty mirror smooth. I showed that in the previous one, so I'm not going to do it for this one. Just keep working it until it gets nice and smooth. Make your life easier when it comes to burnishing. The smoother it is. You could probably take a pass at it with 800 or 1,000, even wouldn't hurt, but this is what I have set up, so this is what I'm going to do. And then the last step of this is I'm just going to go and take this burr off. Yep. And at this point, make sure you get it all off. You don't want any burr overhanging at this point. Cleaner is better. And you will have mechanic hands by the time you're done with this, if it's a carbon steel scraper. Okay, so this half of the scraper is all nice and flat, and I'm ready to start burnishing it. So I'll put it back like it was. There was my line. Okay, now rinse and repeat from the other one, and I'll just show just a little bit of this. I just do this in little short sections. Oh, it's still rough down there. And I use my edge that I have on my burnisher, work little short portions of it, and with this one I'll work up and down. Just that bottom going to need a lot, so you hit it going both ways. And then on here I can use the flatter part on these wider radiuses. I'm applying a lot of pressure on this. I'm pushing pretty hard, and expect to spend 5 to 10 minutes doing this. So once I've got this done on the outer surface, we'll come back and finish up and go on to the next phase. Okay, I'm almost done with the top burnishing here. I had to move this so I could get a better bite. Just want to keep working it until it looks pretty polished. The purpose of this is so that we're actually hardening the metal on the top of this edge. And I'll go over that again in the recap, but we're performing a little bit of low-tech, high-tech metallurgy here. Now, I'm going to pop this guy out of the vise, and I need to take the burr off the sides like we did on the other scraper. Don't be afraid to put some oil on it when you're doing this part. Make your life easier. It doesn't take much either. Hoo-wee. Take your time on this part, especially if you've got a pretty complex curve like this one. This one is really almost too complicated to be useful, but I've had this one for 30 years. At this stage of my life, I'm not buying another one. Might make one at some point that has a couple of these curves just separated out, because this thing is a real pain to sharpen. There's that. Rinse and repeat on the other side. This is takes a lot of elbow grease, but once you've got it done, you've got it done, and you actually don't have to do the whole process each time. You just have to touch it up the last few steps. Okay, now I've got the side burrs cleaned up, and I'm going to clamp it back in the vise, and I'm going to just put my final burr on it. This last little bit isn't too much, just takes a little bit. So on the outer surfaces, I typically use the flat side. Find an angle that works for you. I'm not real picky. I vary it somewhat just to handle ergonomics. And it's already raised a burr on that side, and now I'll just go over here on this side. This scraper's thin, so you almost have to put your finger behind it to keep it from flexing. So there, that's pretty good. And then I use the round part for doing this inside edge. I'll do that. Oh boy, I got a little too much there. That one. Same with that one. I think I got too much of a burr on it. Now, when you got something like this, you can move it down in the vise, or I'm just going to keep my finger behind it and work it. Hold it kind of still. Just be careful when you're doing this so you don't rip your hide. Oh, a lot of burr on that one too. Just dull that. Okay, I think that one's about ready to clean up and use. All right, I've got a piece of maple here, and we can give it a try. I bet this will just raise a good shade. Yeah, there we go. And these are really good for when you got to have a piece that's tore out like that, and you need to hide it a little bit. It can make it disappear and just look like a dent in the wood. So there you go. Okay, I want to just recap everything here at the end of the video. I brought my straight scraper out. So these are all the tools, and there'll be a picture up there of everything up close. And scraping, or sharpening your scrapers, I'm sorry, has two parts into it. At least this is the way I understand it. Remember, you know, these are all opinions, and everybody has opinion and so forth. What we do, and I'm going to show it on my straight scraper here, is part A, which we showed in the videos, is I'm dressing the edge. If I want a straight edge, then I'm taking my file and I'm straightening this out. If I want a curved edge, I'm just taking my file and I'm dressing in my curved edge, so it's whatever I want that shape to be. or my outer edge. But that's all the part A is, the filing and dressing part. Then, while I'm still doing it, I'm trying to get my edge 90 degrees to the surface, perpendicular to the surface, or real close to it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Now, once you've done that, you don't have to repeat that process every time you sharpen. I use a scraper every day, particularly this one, and I might only redress it 2 or 3 times a year, but I sharpen it almost every day. So what I do is when I'm resharpening it, I just run it over this way a few times and then run my edge over it that way a few times. It raises my burr and we're good to go for a couple days again, or a day, or however long it's going to be. You don't have to completely redo the whole process, just the second part. Now, the second part of the process is I've already got my edge all dressed, and so I'm going back and forth. And what we're doing here, my understanding of it, is we're essentially using the burnishing tool to peen, for a lack of a better term. We're peening this edge out, and we're creating a mushroom here that's a couple molecules thick, but it's much harder metal than the body of the scraper, whether it's a flat, curved, whatever. Once that's done, what we're doing here when we're doing the second part, the dress in, particularly, after post dress in, and particularly when you just dressed in the scraper, is I'm going back and forth over this, and this is why it takes a couple hundred passes the first time, is I'm hardening this edge, making this edge that's right here much harder. It's only a couple molecules thick, and when it's doing it, it's creating a little bit of a burr on each side. Sukey has a drawing up there. And it's exaggerated because you can just barely feel it. You go back and forth over that. And then the next part is you flatten that burr back out so it's not so dramatic. And then you go back at an angle to give it just the right amount of curve. Now, I don't know the exact science behind it, but I do know that it's making it harder. And once I figured that part out, that what I was doing is essentially doing the same thing as like peening a scythe blade or a hook blade. It all made sense to me, and the whole thing made sense. So I all of a sudden, the light went on and said, oh, I don't have to file this thing every time, and I don't have to dress it every time. I just need to run it over with the burnishing tool and get that burr back on quickly, and then I'm ready to rock and roll. So if you have that little nugget in the back of your mind, it saves you a lot of time, and also it should make it easier to understand what we're actually trying to do here. So we're breaking this down into 2 parts. We're dressing the thing out, which you don't have to do very often. And then once you're dressed, then post-dressing, you do need to spend some time getting this really hard. But once it's hardened, we can call it, I'll just refer to it as the C part, not the B part. Then you just need to just kind of lightly resharpen it each time, just like a kitchen knife, taking it's a burnishing tool also. I can't think of the name of it right off the top of my head. Same thing, but just go over it a couple of times, and then you've got your edge back on there, and then you're good for a few hours of work or whatever it is, depending on your wood you're working on. Now, my last tip, scrapers don't work on all woods. Pine, even poplar, do not scrape nearly as well as beech, birch, oak. The harder the wood, the better it scrapes, typically, not always. And where these really shine is where you have a piece of wood where the grain is going 5 different directions in 10 inches, it's curly or something, and you can't plane it at all. And that's, of course, where these really shine, though I do scrape after planing to take out all the little ditzels that pop up and things. And I use this guy because I don't care how careful you are, you always have 1 or 2 places where you've dug something out. And so I use that to soften all the little splinters and get rid of it and hide it. And when somebody says something, it's, well, it's a hand-finished surface, and that's just the way it looks. So with that, get out and let's make some sawdust.